Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new build on Spellslam. Today we are getting inspired by a list from Saffron Olive and MTG Goldfish. He played this in early 2019 and he called it Dreadmaw Stompy, and I've kind of copied the list and made a few little adjustments to it, and I'm actually getting inspired by a new card from Throne of Eldraine. I guess it's not so new anymore, but it's a 2-mana 0/4 with Defender, and you can tap it to give all of your creatures haste until end of turn. This is a pretty spicy card for a common, because this is usually something that you see in rares. Obviously, it has some drawbacks and some advantages. It's not usually something that you see in aggressive lists, but in our case, in a ramp deck, this actually has a lot of really cool applications across the entire deck, which we'll be talking about shortly. To start off our deck, we've got our 18 basic forests, and then we have a pretty typical ramp package here with the Arbor Elf that can untap forests, and then we are enchanting our forest with Utopia Sprawls and Wild Growths to be able to produce 4 mana on turn 2 potentially, which is really, really powerful. And then to top it all off, we've got 4 copies of Wall of Roots, which is a really good blocker, and when you cast it, you can actually use it as soon as it comes into play by putting a -0/-1 counter on it to add a green mana. You can only do it once, but it actually sets us up for a lot of really good ramp turns. Moving on to what we're ramping into, we've got Blastoderm, which is a 4-mana 5/5 with Shroud, which means you can't target it, but your opponents can't target it either, which makes it a really strong threat. And it has Fading, which means it can only attack for potentially 3 turns, but with the Crashing Drawbridge, it actually gets an extra attack in. And again, if we can get to 4 mana on turn 2, we're attacking with a Blastoderm on turn 3, which is extremely powerful. Otherwise, we've got Crashing Tenodon, which you can also cast for 4 mana if you're willing to pay 4 life for it, which is usually worth it. If you've got the extra mana and you want to pay 5 or 6 mana, you absolutely can. And this one's a 5/4 trample. Do note that it does die to artifact removal, and it does not have Shroud, so not quite as strong as Blastoderm in my opinion, but the trample often is a really good thing to have in Pauper to stop all those nasty chump blockers. Next is a Tangle Golem, 2 copies, 7 mana 5/4 with no trample this time, so I'm not such a fan of this card, which is why I've gone down to 2 copies compared to Saffron Olive's 4 copies. And this one has Affinity for Forests, which means it costs 1 less to cast for each forest you control. And so often you're casting this for like 5/4 mana, which is okay. Again, it loses the trample compared to the Tenodon, and it's not as, quick usually to cast. So I'm not such a fan of this card, and it has all the same kind of drawbacks with the 4 toughness and the being an artifact. So I've cut down to 2 copies on this. Next, we've got Colossal Dreadmaw, 6 mana 6/6 trample Draft Chaff, which is why I kind of call this Drawbridge Jank. So this is a 6 mana 6/6 with trample, really, really strong card in Pauper, surprisingly, because not many things can deal with a Colossal Dreadmaw aside from, straight up removal and edicts and stuff. But in combat, this is really hard to beat, honestly. So, and if you can get it out on turn 3 or 4, especially with a Crashing Drawbridge, this thing gets really scary really fast. Now, to make up for the fact that we don't have 4 Tangle Golems, I've added kind of a larger top end. We've got Maul Splicer, which is a 7 mana 1/1, gives all your golems trample, and it makes 2 3/3 golems when it comes into play. So this is kind of a really good card against heavy removal decks, so that you're not, putting all of your eggs into one basket, and you can attack with 3/3 trampling golems, which is really, really strong, really good against, heavy removal decks, mono black control, teachings, things like that. That's the kind of things you want to have this card for. And then obviously the classic Ulamog's Crusher, which is an 8 mana 8/8 with Annihilator 2, and it has to attack each combat with if able, which is no problem for us. These cards are one-ofs because I can also fetch them with Fierce Empath, which is a card that I really, really like. Used to play this all the time. It's a 3 mana 1/1 that can tutor up any creature that costs 6 or that has converted mana cost 6 or more. So that includes Tangle Golems and Tenodons and the Dreadmaws, Ulamog's Crusher, Maul Splicer. So it gives us a lot of variety in terms of what we can fetch for, and it's a chump blocker, and it's Edict fodder, which I really, really love. So a really good inclusion for the deck, and often we don't mind paying, 11 mana for our Ulamog's Crusher, or 7 mana for a Thundering Tenodon. So really, really strong card in our deck. And then finally, to kind of round off our main deck, we've got 3 copies of Rancor, 2 copies of Vines of Vastwood, again, to help us against those heavy removal decks. We can also use it on our opponent's creatures occasionally when they want to do some pumping or something. Moving on to the sideboard, we've got 2 copies of Moment's Peace. You know, whenever I'm playing green, I usually end up playing a couple of these in the sideboard. 3 copies of Nilee's Disciple. This card's particularly strong because of its devotion. With all of our ramp cards like Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl, it ends up, you know, gaining us 5, 6, 7 life when it comes to play. So really good against burn. We've got 2 copies of Relic of Progenitus, 1 copy of Fangren Marauder. Again, you can fetch it up with Fierce Empath, and it completely wrecks ATOG in Affinity, which is kind of its main purpose, but you can, you know, board it in against Tron and stuff like that for some really good value as well. And it's also, you know, a 6 mana 5/5, which is really, really strong. Lead the Stampede. Really strong card against heavy removal decks or counter decks like Delver and stuff, where you can kind of refuel pretty effectively, because we do have 29 creatures in our deck. So we're pretty much guaranteed to get, you know, 2 to 5 creatures every time we cast this, which is really, really great. And then at the end, we've got Thermokarst, 3 mana. Way to destroy lands. We can get this out on turn 2 and kind of jank people out. Really good against Tron, but I'll board it in against burn sometimes if I feel like it, and it can really screw with a lot of people. So that is Drawbridge Jank. Oh, one thing I want to mention as well with the Crashing Drawbridge is how good it is with our Arbor Elves. So occasionally, with Crashing Drawbridge, if you get Crashing Drawbridge out on turn 2 and then you draw your Arbor Elf, well, you can cast your Arbor Elf, tap the Crashing Drawbridge, give your Arbor Elf haste, and then immediately use it, which can actually generate extra mana on that same turn and allow you to have some really, really explosive plays. So Crashing Drawbridge, it can have some pretty big drawbacks in terms of like being a really, really bad top deck in the mid to late game, but in the early game, it just really like pumps out all of your fatties, lets you get in for that extra damage with the haste, and also lets you ramp out even faster with all of your ramp spells. So I'm looking forward to trying this out. I hope you guys are looking forward to watching this, and we will see you in the games.